While you are continuing to feed your bodies, we will resume the feeding of your souls. And we have with us today someone who needs as little introduction as Randy Weingarten does. This is, I get all of the easy tasks. But we are extremely pleased to have Linda Darling Hammond with us. I think without question, not only can she be fairly described as the Dean of Educational Research in the United States, but we can say that her educational research has in many ways foretold what we're looking at this conference, because it has always been grounded in the work that goes on in real classrooms and real schools. And it has always looked at relationships between teachers and students. So it is our pleasure to have Linda here today to address us.
Well, this is a very august gathering of, it's like old home week here. What a wonderful topic and collection of people, and I'm really delighted to have been asked to attend and to share a couple of thoughts about this really critical topic. I think it is a framework that should redefine the way we think about teaching and the career path of teachers and the organization of schools and the way we do business for kids as well as for teachers for the next era. Because thankfully we are coming out of an era. No Child Left Behind has been left behind. As of December 11th, when the president signed the new ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. What will happen with that act is going to depend a lot on each of the people in this room and those in states, because states are going to decide whether they are going to move beyond test and punish and ranking and sorting to using multiple measures for information, developing the kinds of assessments that are productive for learning, helping us focus on the 21st century skills that we've got lost a decade in pursuing. We're behind the rest of the advanced world in that respect because of the low quality tests that we had to teach around for the last 15 years. So it's an exciting moment. It's a moment of opportunity. It's a moment of responsibility because there is so much to do. And I want to start by talking about my current home, Silicon Valley, for 1 second, and just sort of make the point that a colleague who's the vice president of hiring at Google makes when he talks. So we bump into each other in the Silicon Valley circuit. That's a different one than this one. And the conversation is really different also. And one of the things he talks about is the fact that when they're hiring someone at Google, they don't look at their test scores. They don't look at their transcripts. They used to. They used to take all this data. They used to make decisions in relation to that data. They did big, giant studies to map the relationship between all of those indicators and people's performance on the job. And they found out that there was no relationship between the scores that people came in with and a variety of other indicators and how they did at Google. So now, what they do when they're trying to hire people at Google is they look for what they call learning ability. And by learning ability, they mean your ability to take a problem, find information with others in a collaborative environment, put that together, weigh and balance what you can find, build something, a solution or a product or an idea, test it out with others and see if it makes sense and revise it and revamp it, because you are learning from the people and the ideas and the experiences and the data that you are engaged with. And that has really got to become the fundamental way that we think about the purposes of education for the 21st century. And that, of course, also pertains to how we think about teaching, as much as how we think about learning. I was yesterday at Alverno College in Milwaukee, and they were honoring, among other things, Sister Joel Reed, who was having her 90th birthday. She'd been the president of this college that years ago went to what they called ability-based education, which defined competencies and worked around performances to develop those competencies in collaborative spaces. And she reminded us that the word competition comes from the Latin word competare, which means not to fight against one another, but to seek together. Now, we've redefined it in the United States to mean something else, which is mostly to spar with each other, to see who can be on top, and that means somebody else is on the bottom. But at root, it means to seek together. And I think that's what this conference is about. How do we seek together as education professionals the kind of teaching strategies, school organizational strategies, growth opportunities that allow kids to learn, that allow teachers to continually become smarter about how to help that learning, to help the whole organization move forward in tandem, rather than people rowing in a variety of different directions. So I'm probably repeating what people said this morning, but I'm going to just make a couple of points. What do we know about how collaboration matters? Why and how does it matter? How can it occur, and does it occur both in other countries' systems and here? What would it take for us in terms of policy and practice to move to a place where even our competition is collaborative? There's a lot of evidence, and there are a lot of the researchers here who've produced that evidence, so I suspect they've talked about it or will talk about it, that collaborative environments influence school-level gains and achievement more than you would get if you just added up the individual effectiveness of individual teachers by themselves. It enables greater gains in effectiveness for teachers from their experience, and we're finding, as folks like Kraft and Pepe are looking at the experience of teachers, people like Helen Ladd and others, as they, if you look within a teacher, using something called teacher fixed effects, at their growth over time, you do see gains to experience in terms of effectiveness all the way up to 20, 25 years of experience. It's not just the first couple of years, but it makes a big difference the environment that you're in. And if you're in a collaborative environment, those gains in effectiveness are much steeper than if you are having the same year of experience 20 times, rather than 20 years of experience in which you are growing with what you know. Collaboration helps teachers take up complex practices. In TALIS, the international surveys, very interesting. Virtually all teachers around the world, something close to 90%, say they really believe in these sort of 21st century teaching practices, extended project work, opportunities for kids to use technology and collaborate, work in group work, and so on. But a tiny minority actually report that they do those practices. So there's a belief system, but not necessarily enactment. But those who have more collaborative learning opportunities, who have opportunities to work with their peers, to do peer observations, to engage in team teaching or team planning, report that they are enacting those practices at a much higher rate. There seems to be a relationship between how much you can work and learn with each other and your ability to take on things that are more challenging, more complex, and to do the work that's necessary to put those into practice. Collaboration matters not only because it supports teacher learning. Teaching is so amazingly complex that no single person could know everything there is to know. Every child presents a new set of dilemmas. Every lesson can be thought about in 15 ways. And as your goals shift and as your context shifts and as your students shift, you're always having to problem solve. So there is problem solving and learning that is supported by people sharing what they know, sharing what they see about kids in their own classrooms that you might share in common, sharing lessons, sharing techniques, sharing ideas. But the other thing that's really important about it is continuity and coherence. When I was teaching 100 years ago in New Jersey and Philadelphia area in big, warehouse factory model high schools, I had my little classroom and it was an oasis, and I did not have the opportunity to talk or plan with anyone else. Nobody came in my room. I didn't go in anybody else's room. I just did the best I could for the kids that I have for the moment that I had them, and then they would go off. And I couldn't protect them. I couldn't shape the experience in any way. We probably all have these, moments, but one of the moments for me that was so telling about that structure was when I had a young man who had failed all his classes, the year before. I had all the kids who had failed English because who else would you give them to but a beginning teacher? And so I finally got him writing. He wrote in this teeny tiny little handwriting that you could barely read, and he was brilliant. And he started writing, he started coming to school, he started, engaging in the class. And then one day he stopped coming, and I started calling, trying to figure out where he was and his home and so on. And I finally found out when I got to the office and found the right person among all the people there that he'd been expelled for substance abuse. Nobody had even bothered to tell me, as though I would have no stake in a student in my classroom, much less consult me and say, what should we do? We found this kid smoking reefer on the, playground, and what should we do? No, none of that. So the lack of continuity and coherence that occurs in fragmented schools, often these are secondary schools more often than elementary, but it can happen anywhere, we've all seen it, is that kids have a much less coherent experience. And when they have a less coherent experience from class to class and from grade to grade, there are many more opportunities for them to fail and drop out. There are many fewer opportunities for them to learn in powerful ways, as they would have if they had shared norms and shared practices that they were experiencing from classroom to classroom. So collaboration matters not only for teachers' learning, but for the coherence of the school. So how can it occur? Well, we know lots of ways, and some schools in the United States get access to some of these. I'm just finishing a study of international teaching policies in 5 countries around the world, and what's stunning when I look at Finland, Singapore, Shanghai, Australia, and Canada is how many opportunities teachers have that are just tied into the warp and woof of practice to collaborate and learn and grow together. And I'm going to list 10 of them. Peer observations. In the United States, it's relatively rare that a teacher gets a chance to go see another teacher teach, but it's common in other countries. In fact, the TALIS data show that in the United States, teachers are most likely to get feedback and evaluated by principals, 85%. In other countries, they're much more likely to get feedback from other teachers and to spend time in and out of other teachers' classrooms. Obviously, that kind of review and feedback opportunity, joint planning time where people plan around the disciplines or plan around students, consultations around students. Right up the street here at Hillsdale. No, I'm not in California, sorry. I've been in 4 states in the last 3 days. Right up the street from where I work in California, there's a school, Hillsdale High School, which borrowed a practice which had come from New York City, from schools that were redesigned there, where teachers meet regularly every week around kids that they share and problem solve around how to support the kids. That they had to do a lot of fancy dancing to find that time, but that's another way that coherence and support for kids can occur. Lesson study. How many of you here know about lesson study? All right, I don't need to go into great detail for this audience. But it's really remarkable when teachers work to develop a lesson together, watch each other, watch one of them teach the lesson, take notes, video sometimes now, and audio recording and hand recording, look at the students' work, debrief what happened, figure out how to fine-tune that lesson, take it to the next level. In Shanghai, beyond lesson study, which they do there and in many of the other places, they have teaching competitions. So in the United States, we have Ninja Warrior, and we have Survivor, and we have the Top Chef, and all of that. We have competitions for just about everything. But we don't have teaching competitions. And what they've done is they've taken their standards, which are very much focused on 21st century skills, and they're really trying to push away from the old practices of rote instruction that predominated. They've been transforming and working again to rethink the exam system also. So in order to be scored in these teaching competitions, which are in the spirit of Seek Together, you have to demonstrate practices which engage all the kids, which have them working collaboratively, which involve them in critical thinking and problem solving. And this comes out of lesson study, and then teachers demonstrate these lessons, and they get scored on those, and then they come back and debrief and share that with other teachers, so it becomes immediately collaborative again. Action research. Very widely spread, where teachers take up a problem. When I was in Singapore, teachers in an English department were wondering how to improve the quality of persuasive essays. So they had a theory that if the kids did a debate with each other before they wrote their persuasive essays, that this quality of the essays would improve. And they structured that, looked at the way the essays had turned out the year before, did this new pedagogy, looked at the essays that resulted, scored them. In fact, they had improved, wrote it up, and it went into one of the many teaching journals where teachers share the results of their research and their work, as well as being presented in conferences for other teachers and teacher researcher collaborative settings. Ontario and Alberta have sponsored thousands of teachers taking up problems of practice, designing ideas, interventions, projects, programs, and then studying the results of those, and then making that available to other teachers. Thousands of teachers and researchers get together in Ontario every year for a kind of conference that we don't see here anywhere, to share the work that they are doing individually and collectively to improve practice. Cycles of inquiry you're aware of, team strategies. At International High School, and some of the subsequent international high schools that have since been started, a team of teachers takes responsibility for a group of students, 9th and 10th graders, for 2 years as they loop, and the math and social studies and science and so on teachers, there's a little group of 4 or 5 plus a counselor, they're responsible for all of the outcomes of that group of students, looping with them for 2 years. They get extraordinary outcomes because these are new English learners who come in. The criteria to be accepted at the schools, you have to have failed the language battery, the English language arts test, and be a newcomer. And by 4 or 5 years later, they will often graduate in 5 years to make up all the ground. Not only English proficient, but most are graduated and off to college. But how does that happen? It happens because teachers, as a team, take responsibility for the curriculum and the kids in an activity-based curriculum. Developing and scoring and evaluating assessments and exhibitions in schools that graduate students with portfolios. In other settings where there are performance assessments across the school, teachers do that together. Design them, watch kids defend their work, score it together, think about the quality of the standards together. School decision making. In many redesigned schools where teachers spend an afternoon a week around a table, making the key decisions that influence what will happen in their schools. And then professional learning communities that exist both within schools and beyond their walls, like the National Writing Project, which you may have seen just had a big study done about its effects, very strong effects on the improvement of writing practices and outcomes by teachers connecting all across schools, districts, and so on around shared work. So what would it take for us to get from the egg crate classroom isolated setting that still too many teachers teach in today to an era where this shared practice is commonplace? Obviously, time is a factor, and we need to rethink the way we design schools, and there are lots of policies that keep the rigid assembly line factory model in place. We have our teachers teaching more hours per year than any other country in the world. We're tied with Chile on that. It's about 27 hours on average for middle school teachers who responded to TALIS, compared to 19 hours on average in the rest of the world, and 15 hours in a place like Shanghai, where there's lots of time for teachers to create these polished stones and lessons and to do their work. So what would you do with that? 8 hours, imagine 8 hours a week. Just think about it for a minute, what you would do with that as a teacher and how that could be organized in schools. Now, there are schools that have done that. In New York City, where there was a huge wave of school redesign, starting in 1989 when Chancellor Joe Fernandez sort of challenged teachers and principals and community people to rethink schools. And many of them did figure out how to find 7, 8 hours a week. That meant they had to staff differently, more teachers. In the United States, about 50% of education employees are teachers. And in other countries, it's 70 or 80% of education employees are classroom teachers. So you have to think differently about staffing. You have to think differently about scheduling patterns, block schedules, and other things that allow for more extended time. You have to think about contracts, and in New York City, they got to the place where the union negotiated a provision where you could have a school-based contract as long as I think it's 70% of teachers agreed with it, that completely redesigned the way that you use your time and energies in the school. We need to reinvent schools in order to support new forms of teaching. This has not been on the agenda. It was for a while. What shall I say? Somebody decided that reinventing schools was not working and took it off the table for a while, but it's coming back. It's coming because we need to do that. We cannot do this work in factory model settings. We need new approaches to teacher evaluation. One of the things that's very interesting in other countries is that collaboration is a criterion, a big criterion for how you're evaluated as an individual teacher. Your practices of interest, of course, a whole child perspective. It's about how do you help the kids in terms of their development and their moral growth and their health, as well as their welfare and their learning, and how do you help your colleagues? And that's a big part of the evaluation. We can't rank teachers against each other and expect to get to a place where collaboration is valued. I remember when there was a teacher in Springfield, Massachusetts, at the point where the idea of merit pay had reappeared again, and using test scores to rank teachers and then determine pay was on the table. They hadn't had a raise in years. A third of the teachers had left. Very low income district where people were struggling. This teacher was one of the few who grew up in Springfield, was devoted to the kids. Everybody turned to her. She mentored all of the beginning teachers. She gave them the best copies of the textbooks. She helped them learn how to get going, and they cycled through. And somebody said, well, wouldn't you like this system where you would get merit pay based on the scores of your kids? She also took about a third to a half of her kids each year were special education kids because she was the one who was willing and able to teach them. She said, if that happened, I would resign, but before I could get to retirement, I would stop, I would take that best copy of the textbooks, put it in the trunk of my car, and drive it around with me all summer so that nobody else would get it. I would not take the special education kids that I now take because it would just count against me in the system, and I would not be able to help those other teachers the way I do. And we've seen that, you know, not only are the test-based teacher evaluation practices unreliable, unstable, and hard to interpret in many cases, they can also create this anti-collaboration framework for work in schools. What else would we need to do? We would need to begin to refund high-quality professional development that sponsors networks and research for teachers and time in that way, because a lot of it was defunded during the recession, and we haven't brought it back again. So we've had some progress on these fronts, but it's 2 steps forward and 1 or 2 steps back, and we've got to make those steps forward once again to get to a place where we can rebuild what we know works in the places that are ready for it and are prepared to move ahead. I'm just going to close with the African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. As Linda spoke, I was struck by the fact that some of these things are not just things we don't do now. Some of these things are things that we forgot. In doing my research on the history of teacher unionism, I came across a journal that was published by educators in New York City high schools from the 1930s through the 1960s called High Points, which was entirely on professional issues and issues of teaching and learning in the schools. And for some reason in the 1960s, it was probably because the Board of Education withdrew the financial support for it, it stopped. But that was such an important tool for teachers to be able to share best practices across schools. And so in some cases, we just need to rediscover our past and reclaim good work that we were doing that has been lost. So it is time to move on to the next panel.